I need a mother for my girls and you need shelter. The widower or cowboy proposed to the outcast bride. Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind howled across the plains like a wounded animal, dragging sheets of cold rain over the open land. Dirt turned to mud, sky to slate. Anyone not already behind a door was clinging to shelter. A lone figure trudged the dirt road barefoot, soaked, steps slow with exhaustion. Eliza Barrett, no one called her that anymore. Not here. Not since the whispers started. Her dress, once sky-pure calico, now hung in tatters. She clutched a small canvas bag, everything she owned inside, along with a threadbare shawl long past warmth. She spotted the abandoned church just outside town, its paint peeling, steeple broken. She huddled beneath its porch, knees to her chest, rain dripping from the eaves. Peace never lasted long. A woman, red-faced, broom in hand, stepped from the doorway, eyes sharp as knives. "You think you can hide here? Eliza Barrett. This ain't no brothel. I just need to rest. I haven't eaten in." "You should have thought of that before working with Miss Lillian's girls. We know what kind of women end up in that house. You're not welcome here." Eliza didn't argue. She stood, body trembling from cold and humiliation, and stepped back into the storm. The sound of hooves came slow and steady down the road, louder through wind and rain. A man in a long oilin coat rode toward her, hat pulled low. His horse moved with calm certainty, used to bad weather. He saw her, stopped, dismounted. He didn't speak at first, just stood, eyes scanning her soaked, shivering form. Eliza didn't lift her head. Her pride had vanished 3 towns ago. Finally he spoke, his voice low and even. "You got a name?" She didn't answer. "You from here?" She shook her head. "Anyone waiting on you?" "No," he studied her. She noticed the scar on his jaw, half hidden by a beard. "Not young, not old, just worn." "I'm Jedi across," he said. "I've got a ranch 5 miles out. 2 daughters, 1 6, the other nearly 3. She nodded once, uncertain why he was telling her this. "My wife passed last winter." Eliza swallowed. The wind cut through her like wire. "I ain't looking for a lover," he said, "and I sure as hell don't have time to court. But my girls need someone kind, someone who can cook. Hold them when they cry. Remind them what a woman sounds like." She finally looked up. His eyes weren't soft, but they weren't cruel. "You look like you need a roof," he added. "I need someone who won't drink, won't steal, and won't scare my girls. That's all." Eliza opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands trembled. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I don't need to," Jed replied. "I've seen enough to know some folks fall through cracks they didn't make." "I worked for Miss Lillian," she said. "I wasn't one of the girls. I cleaned, watched children sometimes." "I ain't asking about your past," he said, then softer. "And I won't if you don't ask about mine." Silence stretched between them. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a blanket, and stepped closer. "You can say no. All right, we forget this ever happened." She didn't move. "But if you want to come," he said, "there's a fire waiting, a meal, a bed with a roof. Nothing promised, but it'll be yours." Thunder cracked in the distance. Eliza took the blanket and held it close. "Yes," she said. "I'll come." Jed nodded once, no smile, just helped her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. They rode off into the rain. 2 strangers bound not by love, but by need, and the faintest hope of something better on the other side of the storm. The cabin stood near a bend in the creek, its cedar roof bowed from the weight of snow long gone. It was simple: 4 walls, a chimney that puffed weak smoke, and a wooden porch that groaned under boots. But to Eliza it looked like the edge of salvation. Jed led her through the door without ceremony. Inside the air was still, not cold, but not welcoming either, the kind of stillness that lingered after grief. 2 little girls sat at the hearth. The older one, with chestnut hair and sharp, cautious eyes, clutched a rag doll by the arm. The younger, her curls wild and golden, sucked on 2 fingers, peering up with a mixture of wonder and fear. "They're yours?" Eliza asked softly. Jed nodded. "Claw's the big one. Emma's the baby." The girls didn't speak. Claire pulled her sister closer, watching Eliza like she might turn into smoke and vanish, or worse, stay. Jed removed his coat and hung it by the door. "You'll sleep in the back room." It used to be hers. "There's still linen." "I didn't have time to change things." Eliza didn't ask what he meant. She understood. At night, she cooked what little she found. Dried beans, a few potatoes, and a jar of pickled beets. The girls didn't eat much. They stared, studied. Eliza smiled gently, but said little. Jed sat at the table like a statue, eating in silence. His presence filled the room without trying. When the girls were tucked into bed, Eliza stepped out to the porch with a wash basin, scrubbing the grime from her hands. The stars were faint, the air sharp. She exhaled slowly. "You don't talk much," she said without turning. Jed leaned against the doorframe. "Talking don't fix things." "No," she agreed, "but sometimes it helps the hurting feel less loud." He didn't reply. In the days that followed, Eliza scrubbed floors, patched curtains, and swept away months of settled dust. She tried to hum while she worked like she used to when watching over the madam's toddlers back in Kansas. But the girls kept their distance. Emma would peek around corners and vanish. Claire followed Eliza with eyes too old for 6. The townsfolk didn't miss her arrival. At the general store, whispers trailed behind her like burrs on fabric. A man tipped his hat, but his wife pulled him away. Children stared. Women turned their backs. "Liza Barrett. Ain't she the one from that house? She'll poison those children's souls. She's not fit for a widower hour's memory." Eliza heard it all. She kept her head low. And rainy afternoon, while organizing a cabinet in the back room, the one that had belonged to Jed's wife, Eliza found it. A small bundle of pale blue yarn fraying at the edges. A baby's blanket. She lifted it gently. It was soft, though moth-eaten at the corners. As she unfolded it, something fluttered to the floor. A tear stained, just one, dried and faint but unmistakable. It caught her breath. She knelt, pressing the fabric to her chest. That scent was long gone, but the memory lived in its threads. This wasn't just cloth. It was a mother's sorrow stitched into every loop. She placed the blanket back with reverence. That evening, when Jed returned from checking the cattle fence, she met him at the porch with 2 steaming cups of tea. "I found the baby's blanket," she said. He didn't look at her, just took the cup and stared into the twilight. "I didn't touch anything else," she added. Jed sipped. She knitted that before Claire was born. Said she wanted something soft to wrap her in, something that smelled like home. Eliza sat beside him, silent. She stopped smiling after Emma wouldn't talk, wouldn't eat. One morning, I found her out back in the barn. His voice didn't break, but his hand tightened around the cup. "I thought I could fix her," he said. "I just didn't know how." "You did the best you could," Eliza said softly. "No," he replied. "I just did what was left." "Inside," Emma whimpered in her sleep. Claire shushed her. Eliza stood and turned toward the door. "Let me try what's left," she said. Jed didn't stop her, didn't say thank you. But when she tucked the blanket into the cedar chest that night, she did so knowing it wasn't just a memory she'd found. It was permission to begin. Sunlight spilled through the cabin's narrow window panes, casting long lines of gold across the floor. Outside, Thiland was beginning to thaw. Birds returned to the low brush, and the creek behind the house whispered with meltings now. Inside, Eliza sat by the hearth with a needle in her hand and Emma's little coat in her lap. A tear had opened along the sleeve, the kind made by careless branches or rough play. The thread she used was faded blue, pulled from an old bonnet she'd found in the back of the pantry. Emma lay beside her, eyes wide, watching every movement. "Would you like to hear a story?" Eliza asked, not expecting an answer. The child nodded at once. Elisa smiled gently and began, her voice low and warm. "Once, long ago, in a land of endless hills and big skies, there lived a little girl who was watched over by a mother made of stars. This mother couldn't always be seen, but when the little girl was scared or lonely, she'd feel a gentle hand brushing her hair like the wind on the prairie." Emma blinked slowly, fingers still in her mouth. "She didn't have a name, this angel mother," Eliza continued. "But every time the girl felt safe, every time she was warm or full or held, she knew her mother had been there." Eliza paused. The fire crackled softly. Even when the world was cold, that little girl always carried one thing close to her heart. A piece of cloth her angel mother had stitched with flowers no one else had ever seen. Emma leaned into her, curling into the crook of her arm. Her little hand rested on Eliza's knee, and then Ina's voice barely above a whisper. "Mama." Eliza froze. The word hung in the air like church bells at dusk, clear, soft, and sacred. She looked down. Emma's eyeshad already closed, her breath evening into sleep. In the doorway, Jed stood. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something had drawn him to the threshold. And now, hearing that single word from his daughter's lips, he turned and walked away before Eliza could see the look on his face. That the next morning he found her out near the barn, brushing down the mule. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a folded square of cloth. "What's this?" she asked. Jed rubbed the back of his neck. "I know you've been sewing a bit. I found that in the trunk. Figured you'd put it to better use than I would." She unfolded the fabric. It was soft cotton, pale with age, but stitched along the edge with careful, clumsy violets done by a beginner's hand. "These were hers?" Eliza asked. Jed nodded. "She tried to learn embroidery while she was carrying Claire. Said she wanted to make something real for the baby. Never got far." Eliza smoothed the cloth with both hands. "It's beautiful. She'd be glad someone was finishing what she started," he said, then motioned toward the back of the property. "You see that patch of firth by the creek?" he said. "She stopped planting after Emma was born. Weeds took it over." Eliza looked toward it. The fence was broken in 2 places, but the soil looked rich beneath the wild. Jed continued, "You can have it. Plant what you want. Vegetables, flowers, or nothing at all." She turned to him, unsure she understood. "It's your land now," he said simply. "I'll have the fence fixed before the week's end." Her breath caught. "You don't have to. I wanna," he interrupted. "It's not much, but it's something." Eliza waited until he walked away. Then she knelt in the dirt, still holding the embroidered claw. Hep pressed it to her chest. And for the first time in years, she cried not from fear or shame or hunger, but because someone, without demand or pity, had offered her a place not as a duty, not as a shelter, but as someone who could grow roots, as someone who belonged. The spring sun rose over Eden's Hollow, casting soft light across the dusty streets. But by noon, the air turned thick with something unseen. Whispers trailed Eliza wherever she walked. Pauses in conversation lasted just long enough to sting. At the bakery, Mrs. Kellen, who once gifted her plum jam, suddenly had nothing to say. At Thamer Cantil, the storekeeper's daughter froze mid-measure. "Mama says I shouldn't talk to you," she murmured, face red. Eliza simply nodded, her coin still in hand. By the 3rd day, she knew what this was. Not suspicion, certainty. Something had come. That afternoon, Jed returned from town, quiet and grim. "There's a man staying at the inn," he said. "Claims he knows you." Her breath stilled. "What does he look like?" "Slick hair, pale hands, smiles too much." Eliza stepped back. Charles Whitlow, Jed's brow tensed. "Who is he?" She sank onto the porch step. "He ran a boarding house in Kansas. Looked proper on the outside, but it was a brothel." Jed waited, unmoving. "I wasn't one of the girls," she said quickly. "I cared for their children, fed them, cleaned, watched over them when their mothers couldn't. He told me I belonged there, that I'd never be anything else. When I finally ran, he followed." Jed's hands tightened, but he said nothing. That Sunday, Whitlow showed up at church, smiling, shaking hands, chatting like an old friend. His charm soaked deep, and the poison took hold fast. By Wednesday, the school teacher quietly asked Eliza not to bring Emma to the yard anymore. Some parents are uneasy. By Friday, a crowd had formed in the market square. Not quite a mob, but watching, waiting. Jed came into town for supplies and was met by Sheriff Dobson and 2 elders from the parish. "We've had concerns," one said. "It's not personal, Jed. It's about the children." Jed narrowed his eyes. "What children? Yours? Others?" "This woman, she has a reputation." "She's not just some woman," Jed replied calmly. "She's my wife." A hush fell, and then Whitlow stepped from the crowd. "You married her?" he scoffed. "You've made her respectable, given her access to your girls. What happens when the act wears off?" Jed turned, met his eyes. "You'd know about pretending." Whitlow smirked. "Anna's father is filing for custody. Says your household isn't safe anymore." That night, Claire clutched her doll and whispered, "Are they going to take us?" Eliza held her close, brushing her hair back. "Not if we can help it." The next morning, the town called a public meeting in the square. Eliza stayed behind, arms around her girls. Jed went alone. The crowd gathered, shopkeepers, ranchers, church ladies, the preacher, even the teacher. Jed stood in the center, silent. Sheriff Dobson stepped forward. Jed, the people just want to know the truth. Is it true what they say about her? Jed scanned the crowd. I don't know what she was. I didn't ask. Still won't, the woman muttered. Of course he won't. Jed raised a hand. But I know this. Before Eliza came, Claire cried herself to sleep every night. Emma wouldn't eat unless I fed her. There was no singing in my house. No laughter, just grief. He looked them all in the eyes. Since Eliza came, they sleep, they laugh, they run to her when they fall. Claire learned to tie her shoes. Emma said, Mama, for the first time since Anna passed. He paused. So no, I don't care what she used to be. I care what she is now. And if you want to drag her name through the dirt to feel cleaner about yourselves, maybe she isn't the one who should be ashamed. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting. Wind stirred skirts and dust. Jed turned and walked away without waiting for a verdict. At home, Eliza stood on the porch watching him approach. What happened? She asked. He reached for her hand, right there in the open in daylight. They won't take you, he said. Not from me. Not from them. Her voice broke. You stood up for me. I stood up for the truth, he said. You just happened to carry it. That night, the girls drifted to sleep listening to Eliza's voice read from a worn book, and Jed, quiet by the fire, didn't just hear the words. He listened to the silence that followed. It wasn't filled with fear anymore. It was filled with peace. The night was still, too still. Even the wind had gone quiet as if holding its breath. Then came the crack. A single snap, sharp and unnatural, followed by a burst of orange flickering against the black sky. Jed woke to the smell of smoke. Eliza! He shouted, bolting upright. The barn! They raced outside. Flames were already eating through the lower beams, licking at the old hay bales stacked in the loft. The horses screamed from inside, wild, panicked. Jed grabbed the water barrel, yelling for her to stay back. But Eliza was already running. Eliza, wait! She didn't. She dove beneath the smoke, hand pressed over her mouth, skirt trailing like a shadow behind her. Inside the barn, chaos reigned. The flames roared louder with every second. Most of the horses had broken free, but one remained, trapped in the far stall, eyes wide with terror, shadow. The black mare, Jed's late wife, had raised her from a foe. Eliza knew what the horse meant. She opened the stall gate with shaking fingers, whispering through the smoke. Come on, girl. Come on! The mare backed away, nostrils flaring. The roof groaned above them. Please, Eliza cried. A beam cracked and dropped. Fire leapt between them. Eliza flinched. Her arm brushed against the burning timber. She cried out, but didn't stop. She flung the stall door wide and slapped the mare's flank with her good hand. Go! The horse bolted into the night, hooves pounding. Jed met her just outside, pulling her away seconds before another crash behind them. Together, they fell under the grass as the barn hissed and crumbled. Smoke curled around them like ghosts. Eliza, your hand, he gasped. She didn't look at it. She's safe. Jed wrapped his coat around her and carried her inside. Hours passed. He cleaned the burn with cool water, wincing as she did. Her skin was blistered, angry red. He ground herbs into a pus the way his mother used to, murmuring apologies with every touch. She barely spoke. The pain was worse now that the adrenaline had faded. You could have died, he said. Her voice came soft. So could she. Jed finished bandaging her, then sat beside her on the floor, back against the wall. He took her good hand in his. It wasn't duty anymore. I never told anyone this, he said quietly. After Anna died, I used to sit out by the creek with a bottle and a rope. Eliza turned her head toward him. I'd tie knots, he continued. Tell myself I was just practicing that I'd never really do it. But I always stopped when the sun came up. Because of Claire, because of Emma, because I hated the idea of someone else telling them who their father was. I wanted them to hear it from me someday. All of it. He looked down, but mostly stayed because I was afraid I'd see her again and she wouldn't want me. Eliza reached up, touched his cheek with trembling fingers. You stayed, she whispered. That matters. Their eyes met. His guarded hers full of something unspoken, and then slowly he leaned forward. The kiss was not rushed. It wasn't desperate or hungry. It was quiet, soft like forgiveness, like two wounds leaning into each other, not to heal, but to breathe. When they pulled apart, Jed pressed his forehead to hers. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he murmured. "I didn't either," she replied, but neither of them pulled away. Outside, the fire had died down. Inside, something else had started to burn. The day after the fire, the sky turned cold again. Rain swept over the land in slow gray sheets, softening the earth where ashes had once burned bright. Inside the cabin, Elisa moved quietly. Her bandaged hand throbbed, but she refused to rest. Something inside her wouldn't let her. She was cleaning the bedroom closet, Anna's closet. It still held the scent of old lavender and wood smoke. Eliza was careful with everything: a hairbrush, a worn ribbon, a pair of gloves with the fingertips rubbed bare. Behind the closet's back panel, a sliver of loose wood caught her eye. When she pressed it, the piece shifted inward and something fell out. A folded envelope, yellowed, creased, brittle with age. "To Jedediah. Only if I cannot say it aloud." Eliza froze. She carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and stared at it for a long while before opening it. The ink was faded, but the words remained strong, achingly human. "Jed, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to tell you myself. I don't know what's wrong with me. Every day I look at Claire and feel like I'm watching someone else's child. I want to love her, I do. But my chest feels heavy, like I'm breathing through wet cloth. When Emma came, I thought the darkness would pass, but it didn't. It got worse. I smile when people visit. I nod when you talk. But inside I feel like I'm sinking. I don't want to be this way. I see you trying so hard. You carry all Ophis. I wish I could be more than a burden. Please forgive me if I fail you, if I fail them. I'm trying, Jed. I promise I'm trying." Anna Eliza's throat tightened. She pressed the letter to her chest. That evening, she waited until the girls were asleep, then handed the letter to Jed in silence. He looked at her puzzled, then unfolded the page. The more he read, the stiller he became. When he finished, his shoulders fell. Eliza reached for his hand. He didn't speak for a long time. "She never told me," he whispered at last. "Not once," Eliza nodded. "She didn't know how." Tears slipped down his face, silent and unashamed. She had never seen him cry before. "I thought it was me," he said. "Thought I wasn't enough, that I made her feel alone." "You didn't," Eliza said softly. "She loved you. She just couldn't find her way back." He turned the letter over in his hand. "Why didn't I see it?" "Because you were carrying her and the girls at the same time." They sat in silence, the weight of the letter between them. "I want to bury it," Jed said finally. "Not to forget, but to let her rest." Eliza didn't ask where. He led her outside, rain still drizzling, and walked past the barn ruins, past the porch, toward the patch of land by the creek, the garden she'd started weeks ago. The flowers had begun to sprout, a few stubborn wild blooms already reaching toward the rain. Jed knelt beside them, dug a small hole with his bare hands, and placed the letter inside. Then he looked up at Eliza. "Thisland," he said. It was hers. Then it was empty. "Now it's yours and alive again." Eliza dropped to her knees beside him. Mud soaked through her skirt, but she didn't care. Together they covered the letter with dark, rich soil. She pressed her palm flat over it. Jed placed his hand over hers. The moment held. No words, no vows, just the simple truth of grief laid to rest and something fragile taking root in its place. In the morning, the sun would rise over that small garden, and the past, no longer buried in shame, would begin to bloom with grace. The sun hung low over Eden's Hollow, casting a soft amber hue across the prairie. Bird song echoed from the creek, and a breeze carried the scent of wild flowers through the valley. It was a quiet day, nothing grand, but for Jada and Eliza it marked something both heavy and light. The day they would say, Edo, not in front of God and hundreds, but in front of the two small souls who mattered most. It had started with a letter from the courthouse. After weeks of tension and threats from Anna's father, still bitter, still grieving, the legal pressure had returned. His lawyer questioned the validity of Jed's arrangement with Eliza. A live-in woman, the document read, with no formal union or legal tie. The implication was clear. Their living situation could be used against them in any custody hearing. so Jed had suggested it awkwardly over breakfast one morning. "We could make it official," he said, stirring his coffee. "You know, for the girls, for clarity, Eliza had paused, then nodded. That makes sense. But when the day came, it didn't feel like paperwork. Claire and Emma picked wild flowers for Eliza's hair. Jed wore a freshly pressed shirt, the one he only ever used for church and burials. Eliza's dress was simple, cream-colored cotton with delicate stitching along the hem. It had belonged to Jed's mother, and she'd found it carefully folded in a cedar chest. The ceremony was held in the garden Eliza had brought back to life. The small patch bloomed with early summer color, iroh, golden alyssum, and the violets she had embroidered months ago. Sheriff Dobson, reluctant but fair, agreed to officiate with a copy of the county ledger in hand. Claire held the ring, Jed's wedding band from years before, polished clean. Emma clutched a stuffed rabbit, her solemn gaze fixed on Eliza's face. They stood together beneath the arch of two leaning trees, branches touching like praying hands. Jed cleared his throat when it came time for the vows. "We don't have to do the whole thing," he murmured. But Eliza surprised him. She looked straight into his eyes. "I want to." He met her gaze and nodded. Slowly, carefully, they began. "I promise to keep your daughter safe," Eliza said softly. "To give them soft hands and firm rules to make sure they never forget they're loved." Jed's voice was low but steady. "I promise to protect you, Eliza, not because I have to, but because I want to. And I promise, Toliston, to not turn away, even when the silence is easier." Tears welled in Elisa's eyes. Claire stepped forward and handed the ring to Jed. As he slipped it onto Eliza's finger, Claire looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. "You're not going to leave us, are you?" The question hit like thunder in the open air. Eliza knelt without hesitation. She placed both hands gently on Claire's shoulders. "No, baby. I'm here for good." Claire blinked fast, then threw her arms around Eliza's neck. "Mama!" she whispered again, not like the first time, fragile and unsure, but now with certainty, with hope. Jed reached out and Eliza took his hand, fingers laced, heart steady, and in that small corner of the wild Wyoming land, surrounded by flowers and the ghosts they'd made peace with, they became something more than man and wife. They became a family. No preacher's sermon, no town's blessing, just a promise made with dirt on their boots, tears in their eyes, and love in the space between breaths. The prairie was quiet now. The wind rustled through tall grasses that swayed like waves beneath a golden sun, and the old cedar cabin still stood, weathered, softened, but standing. Its wood bore the scars of time, of fire, of storms long past. But like the love once grown within its walls, it endured. Inside, a young woman sat curled in a faded armchair, a leather-bound journal in her lap. Her fingers traced the loops and curves of handwriting that had survived generations. Eliza Barrett, cross her grandmother. The final page of the journal was stained with pressed violets, now brittle with age, but the ink remained strong like the woman who had written it. "He didn't marry me for love. Married me because I was alone and he was tired and two little girls needed something more than what the world had given them. I accepted because I was cold and hungry and because no one else had looked at me like I was something worth saving. But oh, by the time he left this world, I realized I had lived a love deeper than anything I'd ever read in a book. Ours was not a story told in churches or written in scripture. It was carved into the beams of a house rebuilt with trembling hands, sewn into a child's torn sleeve, buried beneath a garden where violets bloom every spring. It was the kind of love that didn't burn hot or bright, but warm and constant. It held when everything else fell apart. And when he held my hand in the end, he didn't have to say it. I already knew. The young woman closed the journal, tears on her cheeks that she hadn't realized were falling. Outside, the land stretched endlessly. The same land Eliza had once walked barefoot, weary and unwanted. The same land she had planted with trembling hands. The same earth where she and Jedediah had buried their ghosts and grown something living in their place. The cabin door creaked open with the breeze. A single photograph rested on the mantel, a man with tired eyes and a rough beard. And beside him, a woman in a simple cotton dress, smiling not for the camera, but for something or someone just out of frame. The woman stood holding the journal to her chest. She stepped outside onto the porch, the board still groaning underfoot, and looked out over the wild, untamed fields. No monuments marked their love. No scripture recorded it. But here, in the wind, in the earth, in the echo of her grandmother's words, it lived. It endured. It mattered. And that was the story of a love not born from fairy tales or ballrooms, but from dust, fire, and quiet devotion. A widowed cowboy, an outcast bride, two lost souls who found not passion first, but purpose, and from that love deeper than time. If this story moved you, if it stirred something real in your heart, then saddle up and hit that like button to help more folks find tales like this one. Subscribe to Legends of the Wild West stories for more true grit romance, timeless echoes, and heartbreaks that heal. We've got more stories waiting. Stories where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. There weren't any hardened hearts, however. New episodes every week. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Subscribe now. Ride with us. Remember, love,